Today we're going to look at two things. First is how to create a table, and second is how to use photos on your HTML pages. A table is a pretty simple concept. You've seen it used many times for people to present data. A common one would be when you're watching a baseball game and the scoreboard tells you who the teams are, how many runs they've had, how many errors, how many hits, and all that sort of thing. It's very useful in HTML for presenting scientific information, which was why the web was really created. But we can also use it for some other things. There's nothing hard about creating a table, but it does require us to do things using 3 different elements and using them in a specific order. So I'm going to go back to the same page I've been working on throughout, and I'm going to go in there, and I think before we get into the horizontal roll and all, I'm going to put a table in there. A table is also a block element, so we don't need to put it inside anything else. Starting a table is really simple. We say, I want a table. And at the end of it, we don't want to forget to say, table's going to stop here. The one thing that's kind of hard to get your head around at first is that we read from left to right, so we think of tables as being in columns and then rows. But in HTML, we actually set up rows and then set number of columns per each row. So, for instance, a simple table would have, let's say, 3 columns and 3 rows. And I'm going to go and I'm going to set up the first row, which is just TR for table row. For each column in it, we actually are considering we're putting data there. So that's why we use TD for the contents of the column. And so if we wanted to, in our first row, have 3 columns, we would do 1 TD, and we would do 2 more, like so. And let's say we had team name in the first column and number of runs and number of hits. Boom. So if we save this file now and we go back and preview it, we're going to see something that doesn't really look much like a table. So we got to do a couple things. So we have to tell it to put a border around the table. So the border is an attribute of a table. So just like all other attributes, border equals, and then we'll quote. And in this case, I'm just going to say 1 for 1 pixel, a very thin border, but just something for it to show up. I come back here, I refresh it, and now you can see that. We can also add an attribute of width. And in this case, I'm just going to arbitrarily say, I want to make it 400 pixels wide. I save that, and I go back and I refresh the preview, and it looks like this. Now, when we get to CSS, you can do a whole lot more with tables. You can change the size of each of the columns. You can change colors. You can change what the border looks like, all that stuff. You can have alternating colors on alternating rows. But for right now, this is the basics of it. So this sets us up with 1 row with 3 columns in each row. If I want to make it 3 rows, each with 3 columns, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it in, and I'm going to do that again. But now if I say home team, and I'm going to say 5, and I'm going to say 9, and then visiting team, and I'm going to say 3 because we don't want them to be winning, and I'm going to say 4 here. I save that, come over here, refresh, and we now see how we have a table set up. So again, it's nothing very difficult to do, but you've got to get it right. You got to start with table, you got to build a row, you have to put in a TD for each column in that row, you got to close the row, which I didn't do here yet. Whoa, bad on me. Notice how it figured out that I wanted to close the row. So I'm going to use this as a teachable moment, even though I forgot to do it. The browser did that. The browser said, Tom, you forgot to close those rows, and all of the rows you didn't close. So we're going to have to figure out what you want to do there, and the browser did that for me. So I'm going to save it again, and I'm going to come and I'm going to refresh. It's not going to look any different. It's just now my code is good. So remember, the browser is sort of like the chef. We're given the recipe, and the chef looks, and if the chef says, this calls for a pound of salt, but I think it's maybe a teaspoon of salt, so the chef is going to make that substitution. The browser is doing the same thing here. So we have start a row, we have 3 columns in it, we close a row. We start a row, 3 columns in it, we close a row, start a row, 3 columns in it, close the row, and then we close the table. It's a lot of code, but you have to say make a table, put a row in it, and then put columns in that row. We're going to come back to this in a little bit, but before we do that, I'm going to show you how to add an image. Now remember when we did the A element last time, that it's a really powerful element but it doesn't do anything on its own? Well, image is the same way. Image is a self-contained element. There's no start and end because everything is included in it. If we just type in img for image and I come and I refresh, well, guess what? There's nothing, because we have to have several attributes with it. And the first one is a source, and the source is actually what's the name of the file we're going to be using. And so I went to the Flickr Creative Commons, and I was recently in Copenhagen, so everybody rides bikes there. So I found this picture of this woman biking in Copenhagen. And I'm going to go and I'm going to see what my download options are. And there's one small 400 by 386 that's pretty good for my purposes. Generally speaking, you want to download the largest size possible and then resize it, because you can always go down in size but you can't go up or things will just get pixelated. But this one's pretty good as is, so I'm going to just say I'm going to take this one 300 wide, or 400 wide, I'm sorry, by 386 tall, and I'm going to download that, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to save that in the same folder where I'm saving my HTML file. Now it's important that you save it in the same folder as your HTML file, because otherwise when you put it on the web it's not going to know where to look for this. And if you're doing a big project, you might want a separate folder named something like images, but you'd also have to include in your HTML code that folder name. So to keep it simple right now, I just saved it in the same folder. So I called it Copenhagen Biker. So I'm going to come over back to my code. I'm going to say Copenhagen Biker. And it's got a JPEG extension, just like our HTML file names. And maybe I should spell Copenhagen. Did I spell that right? Copenhagen? Yeah, it just didn't look right there. So just as in our HTML files, we want to give it a name that makes sense. We want to keep no spaces between words. We want to have everything lowercase. So I've now saved this file again. I come back here, I refresh, and down at the bottom of the page, there's my picture. Nice and easy. But we're not going to stop there, because we're going to always make sure we're adding several attributes to the image source. These do a couple of things for us. The first two are specifying the width, which in our case is 400, And the height, then in our case, is 386. Why do we need to do this? Well, because otherwise the web page doesn't know how much room to leave for the photo, and the photo is going to take longer to load than the text. If you've ever tried to download or look at a site on your phone and it's got big photos, the page keeps reloading and moving things around as you're trying to read it, it's because they didn't do this. So we're going to do this. It helps the page know how much room to leave for this if it takes a little longer, if we have bad Wi-Fi or we're using data that's running slowly, etc. So we're always going to include the attribute source, we have to, the attribute width, the attribute height. We're also going to include an attribute called alt. So this is going to do several things for us here. And because I'm going to need some space for these, I'm going to move this on to the next line. And the first thing the alt does is we should give a description of what's happening in the picture. So if we have visitors who have visual problems, they can still have a screen reading program tell them what the picture is of. And so in this case, woman cycles past historic building in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I'm going to fix this little thing here. And so we save that. If we go back and we preview again, we're not going to see any difference whatsoever. There is a way something might pop up, but that's a different attribute we're going to get to in a minute. However, we want to add even more information here because this isn't my photo. I got this from the Flickr Creative Commons. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get the name of the photographer and I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to continue the alt. I'm going to leave the quote. I'm not going to close that quote yet. I'm going to say photo by, and I'm going to paste in the photographer's name. I'm going to go and I'm going to get the URL that I found that on. And I'm going to paste that in. This is how I give credit to the photographer whose photo I'm using. And finally, on any of these photos, you should be able to see a Creative Commons license information on the page. And most of them are going to be this one. All right, so that's a lot of work here and a pretty big tag now. It says put an image here. The source of the image is this picture. It's this wide, it's this tall. The alt says a woman cycles past a historic building in Copenhagen, Denmark. The photo was taken by da-da-da. The website it came from is here, and it's used under this Creative Commons license. So we've now done due diligence there. Now there's one more attribute we might want to use, and it's very similar to the alt. We're going to use everything from the first part of the alt for the visually impaired, but we're going to do something different with it. I'm going to copy that, and I'm putting in the attribute title. And after Denmark here, since that's all I have in the title attribute, I'm going to put the quote marks out there. And I'm going to save this. I'm now going to come over. I'm going to reload the page. Now that the alt, there's nothing we can see on the page itself, but the title, when I mouse over, you see that pops up the little window there and tells me what this photo is. These things are helpful for a number of reasons. One is SEO, search engine optimization. It's looking at things like our alt tag and our title tag to find keywords to determine whether this is a good page to give to someone who's searching, for instance, on cycle, Copenhagen, things like that. Okay. So, boom, that's all that. Now, could we put this picture in a table and actually use a table to have the photo on top and then have a caption underneath? Well, actually, it's about the only way that we can do that. So here we go. I'm going to say, give me a table, set it up with a 1 pixel border, make the width 400 because that's how wide this picture is. Create 1 row. In that row, create 1 column. And in that column, we're going to use all of this. So I'm just going to cut that there and paste it there. Or in this case, I can just do that. We're going to close the TD. We're going to close the TR. We're going to start our next row here. It's just going to have the caption in. And I'm just going to copy. I've got a caption here already, so I can just copy that from the alt text. I'm going to close, you got it, TD. I'm going to close TR. And I'm going to close the table. Now, if I did this all right, once I save and come over here, and instead of just having the picture, I should have a table with the picture in the top cell and the caption in the bottom. So let's see if I've got that. And sure enough, and a border around the whole thing. So if I didn't put the width in here, this would go the whole width of the table, or of the page rather, and the text would scroll out and it wouldn't look good at all. So we need to do that in here. So we've only covered 2 things today, working with tables and working with images, but there's a fair amount of information here, so you should practice with these things. Now, just as a little bonus here, I'm going to show you something that's really, really easy to use, and that is, how do we embed a YouTube video? This is just so simple. I start by going to YouTube and finding a video that I want to embed. In this case, sticking with the theme I have, I'm going to go to a video on cycling in Copenhagen. And I found this one. Underneath it, there's going to be share. And you don't want to just use that. You want to get the embed code. And the embed code for this one looks like this. And so to embed a YouTube video, it's really that simple. The only thing you might want to change once you copy this is if you want to change the width and the height. But for right now, I'm just going to go with what's here. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it here. And the only thing you see that's new is a new HTML element called the iframe. And the iframe just says basically put a frame into this page and put this video in the frame. And this is a strange tag because it has opening and closing to it, even though everything is within the opening one. So it's a little weird, but you don't have to worry about it because YouTube did all the coding for you. So if I go back and get my sample page again and I reload, boom, there's my embedded video right there. And I could play it from there. And if I wanted to, I could put that video in a table like I did with the photo here, and have a little explanation underneath, but I don't need to do that. So there you have it. I hope that helped, and please be sure to let me know if you have any questions.